It's Thursday. That means a special edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. You all know what we do. I'm John. Hello, Jara. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
I'm doing just fine. And in our endless search to find relevant things to talk about, I have come up with, I think, a surprise. Um, so everybody's familiar somewhat with The Sound of Music. Julie Andrews, the Von Trapp family, I think Best Picture, or whatever, in the 1970s or 1980s. But there was a song about the main character, the governess. And how do you solve a problem like Maria was the title. She was living at the time in a convent, wasn't fitting in, and it just wasn't working. And so I came up with this line that I just wanted to share. This is about Maria. She's always late for chapel, but her penitence is real. She's always late for everything except for every meal. I hate to have to say it, but I very firmly feel Maria's not an asset to the Abbey. And so, what I'd like to do is entitle the podcast, How Do You Solve a Problem Like Kamala? And basically, um, the sense is she doesn't fit in. Sense is she's not an asset to the administration. The sense is historically, you can't change the co-captain, in the middle of the game or the middle of a war. That's tantamount to admitting defeat. So what do you do with Vice President Kamala Harris when you're running a tight reelection race? If I could, I'd like to just explain for context purposes kind of how we got here.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, Vice President Harris has quite the resume. After all, she was the DA in San Francisco, and she went on to become this very, very powerful state attorney general. And from there, springboarded to the position of United States Senator, where she was in a very short term because of Senate confirmation hearings, a star, the Senate Judiciary Committee. She attempted to run for president, but was the first to drop out because she made a calculated error by attacking the man who would be and eventually became the front runner and then president, Joe Biden. She attacked him kind of gratuitously. But when it came time to choosing someone, she was, as a running mate, she was from Central Casting. In addition to being a credible woman, a well known name, a star in the Senate, she also had demographics in 2020 on her side. She is part African American, part Indian, South Indian American, and so in many ways from Central Casting. And so we get to the point where she is vice president, and the reports are first and foremost, she has a tremendous turnover in staff. Um, uh, Former and current employees complaining about her. I don't know to what degree that's misogyny. I don't know to what degree it's anything except that it's been reported. Secondly, her problem is that they they can't find anything substantial for her to work on. She was assigned the border. Well, the border is in worse shape today than it was, so she can't run on that as a success. Thirdly, she doesn't appear to be very good with crowds and with retail politics. And so, in addition to the president facing his own issues and problems, and notably age and gaffes, he really can't count on, not only can't count on Kamala Harris, she has become a problem unto herself. In other words, scaring the hell out of people who um, uh, don't want Biden to run, but know that she's next in line and don't want her to be vice president. On the other hand, and this is my final point, she is the vice president. One of the, if not the key issue for Democrats is the issue of choice, abortion. And she is the point person on that. And best to have a woman in charge and the first woman vice president. And she is eloquent, very articulate, and passionate on that issue. And so, how do you handle a problem like Kamala? Or is she as big a problem as I've just portrayed?
Well, I would have to say she's a major problem. If we go about this on a timeline, you know, the resume, yeah, sure. I mean, we know today, right? I don't think this was the case back then, but today, what is a resume? You know, today, what's a GPA? You know, there was a time when a 3.8, a 3.9, and a 4.0 meant something. Today, that's been watered down. There is a phenomenon of grade inflation. That then carries over into the world of resumes. People have really learned how to make their resumes look good. But I had a mentor who once taught me that there's your written CV, and then there's the nonverbal, uncommunicable CV, curriculum vitae, and that is your character. And so if we look at a resume, sure, attorney general, senator, all that stuff sounds like the cream of the crop. But when you look at her character, she doesn't do well, as you alluded to, in the public. She's not a good communicator. I have to be honest, she can barely communicate a complicated idea. There's a lot of cackling. There's a lot of avoiding answering the questions directly. There's a lot of theatrics involved. I'm thinking about, I think it was when she was on The View and they were asking her about COVID, and her answer was smiling. Well, you know, I come from a family of science, and my mother was a scientist, and you know, proceeds to laugh. And that is a typical Kamala Harris answer. It's somebody who looks good in a suit, but when put under pressure, buckles. You know, there's footage of when she was attorney general and she was giving a speech before, I don't know if it were donors, but in influential class of people. And she was recalling the moment as attorney general that she was prosecuting those who were truant, those who were skipping school, essentially were going to juvenile hall. And as she describes it, she uncontrollably laughs. You know, that's kind of Hillary Clinton-esque. Those are those uncomfortable moments when you have to really question somebody's character. So resume good, demographics, it makes sense. But as we saw in 2018, I don't think it was so much. I'm sure that attacking Biden didn't necessarily help, but also remember when Tulsi Gabbard destroyed Kamala on the stage, and Tulsi Gabbard's Google searches went through the roof. Now, I'm not, you know, I think Tulsi is all right. I'm not saying this as a major fan of Tulsi Gabbard, but just somebody like Tulsi, who was new and upcoming, but, you know, didn't have much experience, was able to make mincemeat of a senator. That was kind of the beginning of the end of Kamala. Of course, her poll numbers were never high. I don't think they ever even got close to double digit. And as you mentioned, she had to drop out. You know, we go back to the question, you know, I am somebody who very much appreciates complexities and nuances and subtleties, very much. But sometimes you have to keep it simple. And in the case, you know, the question you asked, is she an asset or essentially, is she an asset or a liability? You can't be both an asset and a liability. You're one or the other. And I think it's pretty well clear that Kamala Harris is a liability. There's a bigger issue, and this is the last thing I'll say, and we've talked about this before, that unfortunately the Democratic Party has pigeonholed themselves into this identity politics, identity crisis, where demographics and your resume have become one and the same, but that unwritten resume, your character, means less and less. And so I think that is a major theme behind the problem that we have with what I'm going to call the liability that is Kamala Harris.
All right, thanks for those insights. I would only add that, of course, progressives are very progressive turnout. It's going to be very important for Democrats. Perhaps it's not going to be enough to rile up the base against Donald Trump or MAGA or whoever the Republican candidate is. You got to offer your base and independents something. And you mentioned the truancy issue when she was a prosecutor in San Francisco and as well as Attorney General. You know that she's very unpopular with the Democratic base for having supported prosecuting parents of chronically truant children. She was also very unpopular because as a Democrat and liberal, there were a number of instances of death penalty cases where there was possibly exculpatory evidence against either those convicted, those already serving time, I should say, and that she had refused to allow that exculpatory evidence to be reviewed. So there were some serious strikes against her. But two things, and I'll close out my case. Number one, are we being misogynistic here? I'm trying not to be. In fact, I hope I'm not. I mean, I'm trying to be as tough and as analytical as I would be, regardless of who the person is. And secondly, some things to look for. And that is, number one, if we start to see President Biden really begin to flag in the polls, worse than where he is, not only in terms of job approval, but once the maybe dust starts to settle on the Republican side, if it in fact does, and we start to see a Republican potential nominee or two really defeating Joe Biden, what will we see? Will we see Joe Biden step aside, drop out? And if he does, will there be a clue? And by that, I mean, will Kamala Harris step down as vice president and be appointed to a special position? The Supreme Court, no openings right now. Ambassador to the United Nations, if in fact there is a crisis of such magnitude that it wouldn't be viewed as a huge step down from vice president. A cabinet position, something like that, that would be a signal that Biden may be stepping down and realizing that in stepping down, he would need to help the party block Vice President Harris from being the automatic nominee of the party. So those are just some comments, some very real and some towards the end here where I'm riffing a little bit.
I like the conversation. I mean, I have to address the question on are we being misogynistic? I mean, the only way to look at that is to look at the poll numbers and to realize that Kamala Harris is about as much disliked as Joe Biden. Their unfavorable ratings are about the same. I think Harris's are a little higher, but they're in a, they're underwater. And so here, that's a perfect case study to analyze whether that's misogyny. I don't think that's driven by misogyny. I think that's just driven by party politics and the dislike of her and Joe Biden's political views and ideological stances. And there probably is a lot of personal stuff there too, because this, make no mistake about it, this is an ugly environment. And so I'm not going to downplay that. But what that tells me is that I would almost believe it were more, I would be more likely to believe it were more misogynistic if hers were, her numbers were bad and Biden's were good, because they're similar in terms of their stances. They have to be. It's president and vice president. They can't be fighting each other on different issues. They have to be in lock. So I think it's more partisan driven. I think it's more ideological based. And there probably are people who just don't like Biden and Harris's character. I think it's really unfair to bring it all down to boil it all down to misogyny. Are there people who feel that way? I'm sure. Are they the majority who dislike, or are the majority who dislike Harris misogynistic? Therefore, I don't think so. I think that goes back to this conundrum of this unfortunate situation the Democratic Party has found themselves in, where that if they don't like something, they have to label it an ism. They have to say it's fascism, it's misogyny, it's misogynistic anti-feminism, and it's racism, or it's whatever. I think that's unfair. I think that has no merit. Putting that aside, your other question, fascinating question. Will we see Joe Biden stepping aside? What signals will there be? I maintain that I think we are in the midst of watching that happen. And I've been following this intensely now. This has been going on for about a year. And I won't go back long. I'll just say last night looked like it could be a watershed moment when I late last night decided to just take a peek at Drudge Report, and the big headline was Biden has facial indentations, and they took the worst possible picture of Biden. Now, whether that's true or not, whether that picture was doctored up or photoshopped, whatever it could be, I have no idea. But the fact that one of the largest aggregate news sites, which by the way used to be right wing, which is now frequented by all ideologies and parties, especially liberals, increasingly since Matt Drudge stepped down, that is a red flashing signal that the knives continue to be out for Biden. The headlines all over about that. He sleeps with a CPAP machine. He's confusing twice in one day, calling the situation in Iraq, or I'm doing the same, referring to the situation in Ukraine as Iraq, and not catching it. They are scrutinizing everything that he's saying and doing, and that is not good. I think that is a signal. So what happens from there? Well, what happened about 2 weeks ago when Governor Newsom went on Sean Hannity, and I will say did a stellar job. I watched the full interview, and although I disagree with Gavin Newsom, I will say that he went above and beyond, going toe to toe with one of the most feared and fierce interviewers. Not so much because Hannity is brilliant, but because Hannity is aggressive, and Hannity holds no bars. And he emerged, I would say, if not victorious, it was a tie. And so that was just 2 weeks ago. And to me, that shows me that idea, I think, is being floated right now. That's my interpretation.
I think you may be right on that. I think positioning, you just don't out of the blue do something like Hannity or start running ads. A couple of quick bullet points at the end. One is I use a CPAP machine, and I don't think that rules out my running for president of the United States. Okay. Number two, just a reminder out there, we are pollsters. We are polling aggressively. We don't talk about a lot of our results because we have proprietary candidates and proprietary clientele. But here and there are published public polls that we do. And I don't want folks to lose sight of the fact that we're still out there, and you're going to be seeing a lot more public Zogby polling in the near future. I guess I would say just in the end, in favor of Kamala Harris, is that there are two recent polls that do show her favorable rating, personal rating at 42, 43%. It had been as low as 31, 32, 37%. If that's a trend or not, I'm not quite sure. But let's see if maybe being out there a little bit and talking as she is about the choice issue is reviving her and her prospects. That's all for me. Final word?
I'll give you that. I say that was the final word.
Okay, it was. We'll see you folks next week. Take care.
Happy 4th.